So good day, civil engineering students. Welcome to another video of our discussion for about Jose Rizal's life, or GED 103, the life and works of Rizal. So for this lesson, the Rizal's cultural roots, we're going to recall the life of Jose Rizal through the written works of various historians and writers. Well, basically, also, here it also presents Rizal's background, so his roots and the events that were significant in the formation of his character. So in the first section, we're going to discuss, or we're going to focus on the ascendance of the Chinese Mestizo, on the cultural roots of Rizal's family, and the significance of the Chinese in Philippine history and civilization. In the second section, I'm going to discuss to you the hero's family background, childhood experience, and notable achievements during his early education. And in the last section, I will be presenting the issues on land ownership during the Spanish colonial period, so the agrarian relations and the friar lands. So in the first section, basically, I'm going to present the significant roles of Chinese mestizos in the Philippine history, in the governance and the economy. And well, it also shows how the Chinese mestizos influenced the character of Rizal, who has also a Chinese roots, or a Chinese root. Okay, so Philippine history is not complete as basis for understanding contemporary society unless it includes the contributions of the Chinese mestizo to the development of the Philippines as a nation. They played a significant role in the formation of the Filipino middle class. So in the call for reforms, the 1898 revolution, and the formation of the Filipino nationalism. So at first, let's talk about the Chinese history in the Philippines. Okay, so as early as the 16th century, the Chinese were already in the Philippine archipelago. However, some historians asserted that it was during the pre-colonial that the Chinese first arrived in the country as merchants between the coasts of Manila and China. Still, it was only during the Spanish colonial period that Chinese immigrants became prominent in the Philippine society. In 1594, Spanish Governor Luis Perez Dasmariñas created Binondo as permanent settlement for Chinese mestizos who converted to Catholicism. Well, in this part of Manila, Chinese merchants and traders were free to do their business. Binondo also became the place of intermarriages between Chinese immigrants and Filipino natives. Thus, the emergence of Chinese mestizos, So, as the Chinese population increased, the Spaniards saw them as a threat to their own rule. They feared that the Chinese would be far less loyal to the Spanish regime than the Indios. Nevertheless, one fact that Spaniards could not discount then was that Chinese became pro-vital to their colonial rule. Why? Because they provided valuable capital to Manila. Thus, despite orders of expelling all Chinese from the Philippines, Governor Dasmariñas realized that Manila need the Chinese for economic reasons. So parang familiar, di ba? So yun yung dahilan kung bakit hindi o hinayaan ni Governor Dasmariñas na manirahan or manatili ang mga Chinese sa Pilipinas, kasi nakakaambag sila sa ekonomiya ng Pilipinas noong unang panahon. So di ba, parang familiar. Yan, so Governor Dasmariñas and the Binondo way back then. Well, the Chinese mestizo communities, aside from Binondo, emerged in many other parts of the archipelago. In Manila, notable communities were Santa Cruz and Tondo. In the early 17th century, more than 100 Chinese individuals were married to native Filipinos in Iloilo, Pampanga, and Cebu. In northern Luzon, Chinese Mestizos could be found in Pangasinan, Benguet, and Mountain Province. So from the beginning of the Spanish colonial period until 1740, the inhabitants of the Philippines were classified into three: Spaniards, Indios, and Chinese. As the Chinese Mestizo population grew, questions regarding their legal status arose. Okay, or the questions regarding their legal status as inhabitants of the country arose. So yan, parang naging issue na yung kapagdami ng population nila sa Pilipinas. So it was only 1741 that their legal status was officially established, when the whole population of the Philippines were reclassified into four according to tax payment or tribute. Okay, so these classes are the Spaniards, the Spanish Mestizos, the Indios, the Chinese, and the Chinese Mestizos. Yan. Ayan. So, Spaniards and Spanish Mestizos were not required to pay taxes depending on their income. More so, a policy that limited the number of Chinese individuals who could reside in the Philippines are restricted. Their area of settlement was implemented. So at the end of 19th century, there were almost 5,000 Chinese Mestizos in the Philippines, with 46,000 living in Manila. Yan. So a Chinese Mestizo then was, una, any person born of a Chinese father and an Indio mother. Okay? So kung ang tatay ko ay Chinese at ang nanay ko ay Indio, ako ay Chinese Mestizo. A Spanish Mestiza and a Chinese Mestizo. So kung ang nanay ko naman ay yun nga, Spanish, at ang tatay ko ay Chinese, so ako ay Chinese Mestizo. Also a child of a Spanish Mestiza and a Chinese Mestizo. Yan. However, a Chinese Mestiza and a Chinese Mestizo a Chinese Mestiza and an Indio were listed as an Indios. Okay, now let's talk about the significance of the Chinese Mestizo. So the expulsion of Chinese immigrants in the Philippines enabled the Chinese Mestizos to take over in the markets that formerly previously controlled. Chinese Mestizos became prominent and influential figures in the areas of industry, commerce, and business during the Spanish colonial period. They carried on a lucrative by collecting goods from the north and selling them to Manila and nearby provinces. Okay, so they monopolized internal trading in the Philippines, while the Spanish Mestizos were concerned with foreign trade. So the entrepreneurial power of the Chinese Mestizos gave way to the emergence of the Philippine middle class, described as more active and enterprising, more prudent and pioneering, more oriented to trade and commerce than the Indios. So they shared economic powers in terms of export and import of products. Okay, so they became landholders, wholesalers, retailers, and owners of the majority of the artisan shops. So aside from contributing to economic stability, another significant role of Chinese Mestizos played in the Philippine society, okay, that was the formation of Filipino identity. Why? Because this was evident during the latter part of the 19th century. Nandito ba yun? Yan. Latter part of the 19th century, when they became clearly influential in the economy of the Philippines as a Spanish colony. So this caused the Spaniards to be concerned with the ability of the Chinese Mestizos to cause discord in society. So by 1800s, the Chinese Mestizos in the provinces began to form opinions regarding the Spanish colonial rule. So it was also difficult to separate from the Indios from the Chinese Mestizos, since they are identified themselves with each other socially and culturally. Chinese Mestizos shared grievances with the Indios about the harsh conditions under the Spanish rule. So Spaniards feared that the independent mindset and the liberalism of these Chinese Mestizos might influence the political consciousness of Indios. And evidently, this emergent middle class, the Chinese Mestizos, rekindled and intensified the growing national opposition to colonial abuses and demanded sweeping social reforms. Okay, so the most vivid manifestation of the budding sense of Filipino nationalism appeared in the late 1870s in the writings of Pedro Paterno and Gregorio Sanciano, who were both Chinese Mestizos. So yan, si Pedro Paterno, kita naman sa kanyang itsura. Well, basically, Paterno and Sanciano wrote about the essence of being Filipino, defended the dignity of the Filipinos, and explained the supposed indolence of the Indios. Okay, so their writings were nurtured by Jose Rizal, a known pride of a Malay race, but also a Chinese Mestizo. And Rizal descended from a pure Chinese ancestors and a long line of Chinese Mestizos and Mestizas. Okay, so the significant role of Chinese Mestizos in the making of the nation was highly evident as the turn of the century. Okay, so their involvement in the armed revolt against the colonizers showed that they recognized Spain as the enemy or the oppressor. So the Philippine Revolution of 1869 to 1898 was the act of determination on the part of Filipino Indios and Chinese Mestizos alike to claim for themselves and for the future generations the incomparable brighthood or the birthright of the nationhood. So, what is the connection of Rizal to these Chinese Mestizos? So, yan. Basically, Rizal is a fifth generation Chinese Mestizo. So, meron siyang lahing Chinese. However, he and his father were considered as Indios. So, some documents and scholarly papers noted that Rizal disliked being called Chinese Mestizo or Chinoy. So, in the modern sense, in the modern sense, Chinoy, and disassociated himself from any Chinese relations. Okay, so through his novels Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo, Rizal exposed the abuses and the corruption of the Spanish authorities, condemned the oppression of the people by the colonizers, and ridiculed the hypocrisy and the overbearing attitude of the Spanish friars. Well, he also depicted the bloody revolution that sparked people's fury and eventually lead them to revolt. And at the same time, as a sign of his contempt toward Chinese immigrants in the Philippines, his novels brimmed with insults and scorn for them. Okay? So Rizal clearly manifested his anti-Christian feelings with his writings. So as well as his correspondence with his family and friends. So by the virtue of his lineage, Rizal could have had a special connection with the Chinese, but such was not the case. The concern here is whether Rizal's disdain over his Chinese lineage made him less of a hero is not something to argue about. Okay? Chinese Mestizo or not, Jose Rizal or Dr. Jose Rizal is a nationalist and a Filipino. So that concludes the first section, which tackles the ascendance of the Chinese Mestizo. So for the section 2, let's find it out in the next video.